We can hear you loud and clear, okay? And thank you so much indeed for joining us. Thank you to KPMG as our hosts for today's networking event. We've got a good gabble of people on the floor listening in, and they particularly come in your insights because you're not only ex-MEP and head of financial at KPMG, but you're also responsible for the terrific piece of work that was published in the FinTech Review, the Khalifa, many weeks ago, and that was an interesting thing to volunteer for.
I'm not sure I volunteered for it. I just didn't say no. So,
oh, there you go.
And it's the policy and regulation chapter, which, yeah.
Chapter. So thank you so much for joining us. You know, we would simply have a little bit of a chat about that because I'm sure people are interested in kind of why you took it on and what it was like going through the process together, the strands of thinking the industry in a collegiate and collaborative way, which I honestly doing, but also which of the recommendations we think may have taken root. So please do introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about an introduction and your area, and then let's dig into those two subject areas.
Absolutely, thank you, Tony, and thank you for the invite. I've now been at KPMG coming up 2 years, having spent 10 years on public policy as an elected member in the European Parliament. And many of you will remember post-financial crisis that the EU decided to put a whole swathe of regulation in place. And so many of you will have implemented that regulation over the course of the last decade. So I apologize for those of you who had a burden of regulation. I may have had something to do with some of it. Hopefully the bits I was involved with were less onerous than some of them might have been in the absence of a UK member sitting at the table. But having spent 10 years doing public policy, I guess it was I was a fairly obvious, maybe victim is too strong a word, but it was a lot of work that I ended up being volunteered for in terms of writing the policy and regulation chapter for the Khalifa Review. And given Ron had decided, when Ron was asked to do the work by the Chancellor, Ron decided he needed 5 chapters. Those 5 chapters being policy regulation, investment, skills and talent, national connectivity, and international attractiveness and competitiveness. So there's 5 chapters. He needed somebody to actually chair each one of them because he wanted them to run fairly independently and wanted them to not be constrained by each other's work so they could run concurrently rather than being done sequentially. So we get more done in the period of time we had. So I chaired that policy and regulation chapter. It kind of was almost a homecoming for me, given my 10 years of doing public policy and regulation. But I was very ably supported by Hogan Lovell's financial services team, and in particular by Rachel Kent, who served as my deputy chair for the period. And we were asked to do this back in the budget last year in March of 2020. With the pandemic, it got put on hold until August. And in August, we were told all systems go, time to restart, and we need to actually get on with this and deliver by Christmas. And so our agenda was quite tight. And we decided very early on, Rachel and I probably could have written our own version of what policy and regulation could be because we're both experts in financial regulation. But we decided very early on it should be the industry's view on this, and in particular the fintech participants, but also those incumbents who use financial technology and are developing financial technology in order to have the broader sense of where the industry could go and the different subsectors could lead us. So we, in our chapter, saw over 220 companies, involved them in dialogue, not just in roundtables, but actually in intensive dialogue. And so 7 initial roundtables. We thought we'd cover the whole sector in 7 different topic themes. We ended up doing a further 11 deep dives on individual topics. And we did, I can't think how many bilaterals as follow-ups to what we were doing, where individual companies felt they didn't want to share in front of their competitors, but felt some of the background information was important to us. So as well as doing all of that with industry, we also work very, very closely with the regulators. Many of the recommendations involve the regulators doing things, not necessarily a change in law, but actually a change in way the regulator actually implements the law. So things like the scale box, really important to make sure that, you know, the scale box is something that we see as a natural evolution from the FCA's first ever sandbox. That sandbox was groundbreaking when it was done by the FCA. All of industry loved it. Everybody thought it was a really cracking idea. So much so it's been copied in almost every financial centre around the globe. But we felt that the UK was missing a trick, that they genuinely had this best system for highly innovative things to be tested, but they didn't follow up by looking after those firms in the next phase of their growth. And so the scale box is very much about, and the whole recommendation is very holistic. It's about how do you hold the hands of those firms who have innovative technology that you want to actually come into the market to serve customers. How do you hold their hand as they become an authorized firm? How do you ensure that they don't fall foul of the rules inadvertently because they're growing so quickly? The scale box is really important.
And so that was a key. And you had several within there. What were your findings, and then subsequently your
So the findings really were that it needed a holistic strategy for fintech, and although it may seem like stating the obvious, the UK hadn't necessarily had a stated ambition with regards to fintech. And you know, the objectives we had for the fintech review overall were threefold. One was to ensure that UK fintech has a continued adoption of fintech at its heart, so that the whole ecosystem in the UK has got fintech in its DNA, that it's instrumental. And it was, how do you advance that innovation? So the second one was advancing the innovation, making sure that you can transform financial services to ensure the UK stays as a premier global financial centre. So the whole ecosystem question. And then the third one was, how do you ensure things like inclusivity? How do you ensure that social values with regards to ESG, that the fintech community can play their part in that, financial inclusion, or indeed in ESG more broadly, things that add value beyond just the obvious financial services. So those were our three objectives. And I think we took a very broad attitude towards policy and regulation. We could have chosen three key areas and said, these are the three things we're going to look at. But actually we decided that we needed to look at the whole ecosystem to really meet that objective. And Ron very generously didn't constrain us. He said, if you can do the work and you're prepared to put the work in, by all means look at the whole ecosystem. The payment system was an interesting one because there was already the payments landscape review that had been initiated. And so there was already a piece of consultation out in the marketplace. So the original idea was we wouldn't even talk about it. But given that the payments infrastructure and the payments ecosystem is so strong in the UK, we thought it would have been a missed opportunity had we not engaged with the payment sector. So we did quite a lot of talking to the payment sector, looking at the way in which regulation currently works, what needs to be maybe right-sized, what maybe needs to be made more proportionate, and the way that you match risk and the level of implementation of those rules. So we felt that there was some scope that the UK could maybe make a bespoke regime rather than relying upon, you know, sort of the EU's rules for e-payments or indeed PSD2. So we felt there was scope to be a little more specific about its future payments landscape. And so we fed into the regulators. And of course, there are so many people involved in the payments regulation, with both the payments regulator, the PRA itself, who on financial stability grounds really do care about this. And certainly Sir John Cunliffe cares greatly about that payments ecosystem. And then of course the FCA that most people face into with regards to their e-payment systems. So there's a huge amount of regulation they face, and we felt that the payments sector should be included. So I hope we've given voice to many of the concerns that were out there. But it's broad. I mean, it's all digital assets, crypto, it's about central bank digital currency. How do you get the financial market infrastructure of the future digitized so that you can actually have all of this innovative sector facing into the digital capital markets of the future. It's very extensive, and anybody who's got a spare afternoon should actually read the document.
Well, I was about to say, anybody out there in the auditorium who has not read the Khalifa Review should absolutely do so, and particularly the area on policy recommendation. But in the last few minutes, just a little bit of an inside track from UK. It's been a few weeks since it was published. You will have seen a sense, you could now hopefully have a sense of the extent to which the government has listened and is not only listening passively, but hopefully responding actively. To what extent have they received the findings and recommendations? And can you give us an inside track on a couple of things that they might be looking at adopting that perhaps others are not aware of yet?
So across the board, they have been incredibly responsive. So I have been actually pleasantly surprised by how engaged they've been on the implementation side of this. And that's true not just of HMT and other government departments, but it's also true of the regulators. So the FCA has already put in place what it calls its scale box. So it has a nursery, it's now staffing up so that they actually can look after these firms in a very different way and actually handhold them all the way through it. They've appointed a new person for implementing the rest of the Khalifa Review. And so they've got a whole team now actually implementing the rest of it. The PRA likewise published their priorities last week, and as well as the CBDC and the issues on crypto, they've also got a whole things on digital market infrastructure. They're really embracing it as a regulator too. And then government itself has decided it really is going to do a significant amount of work. So there was crossover in the investment chapter with the listings review. They're going to take the listings review and hopefully implement the vast majority of it. They've listened to the way that the ecosystem needs to be structured. So we know that in terms of DIT, where they're now going to incorporate trade and fintech into every future free trade agreement, they're going to try and make sure that it's part of the fabric of those FTAs. And indeed, we're going to have teams of people helping fintechs then actually get and sell their services into those countries that we then have those agreements and arrangements with. So they've already done a huge amount. We know they're looking at tax changes to incentivize a lot of the investments. We know they're looking at actually making it easier for capital to flow into the sector, as well as making the regulatory and policy changes. So I'm actually quite excited. I think we're on the cusp of some major change and a continued momentum for UK fintech.
Do you know, and I know that all of the payment technology companies out there will be delighted to hear this, because we have been seeking positive endorsement and practical support from the government, and it sounds as if through your work, Kay, on the FinTech review, the Khalifa Review, you've helped to achieve that. So on behalf of the industry, thank you very much indeed. It's much appreciated, all your hard graft.
Pleasure, thank you.
So the good news, although Kay has to shoot off, sadly now there are some well-equipped colleagues who are pick tables. Sit there and talk with them for a few minutes. You also have a chance to meet our new Trade, Access Pay, Baker McKenzie, and Volt. So 4 new members this month, and there were 5 or 6 last month. So growing community, because this is the place to be. Thank you very much indeed, Kay. And before Sarah says anything else, I'm just going to say thank you to Sarah. This is her last EP at home. You've been chairing this and hosting this for us for months and months and months. And hopefully after we have a new Dakin arriving in a few months' time, you'll be back supporting us in doing a great job as well. So thank you very much indeed for your work.
I'm still around EPA for a little bit longer, yeah, don't worry. Just quickly, Kay, do you have time for one quick Q&A question that came up? Okay.
I do, yes.
Right, who do you think should lead the actions needed to reduce financial crime? Treasury, FCA, PRA, BIS, DCMS, which body should coordinate the actions?
Well, anybody who's read the report knows that front and center, we decided that actually you should put a new task force together, which would have a time-limited sort of existence. We called it a digital economic task force, which would have brought secondees from each of those departments together, along with the regulators, in order to deliver some of the harder things that need that cross-sectoral working, particularly across government departments. They haven't taken us up on that particular one yet. So at the moment, it's still HMT that need to do this, and they need to try and influence people back in the other government departments. But they are really motivated, I think, first time in a long time to deliver. So I think number 10 and 11 are holding feet to the fire at the moment. So even if they don't have a formal task force by name, I am hopeful that they will actually be able to deliver it and be able to come through.